The night Boston froze, a billionaire stumbled across a secret in the snow. Two identical girls asleep on a playground slide, their lips blue, their hands locked together as if even death couldn't tear them apart. Welcome to LessonLit, where true-to-life inspired dramas and emotional storytelling collide. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and tap the notification bell so you never miss the next story that might stay with you forever. Boston at midnight was a study in contradictions. Streets abandoned yet alive with the swirling chaos of a snowstorm, silence pierced only by the wind's low howl. Wellington Park lay transformed into a ghostscape, swings twisting eerily, their chains creaking in the gusts. The storm carried the smell of iron and ice, sharp in the lungs, as if the whole city had paused to hold its breath. Ethan Vale drew his collar tighter against the wind and cursed himself for taking the shortcut. The board meeting had stretched long past its breaking point, and though he had left victorious, the adrenaline of conquest was curdling into exhaustion. His empire had grown by another acquisition tonight, numbers shifting, livelihoods absorbed, another win for the man who never lost. Yet as the snow gathered on his tailored coat, Ethan's victory felt strangely hollow. Everything about him was precise. His leather gloves, his footsteps deliberate against the powder, even the way his breath came in controlled bursts of steam. His life was built on order, discipline, efficiency, every moment mapped like the spreadsheets that had raised him from poverty into power. And yet, deep inside the wallet tucked in his breast pocket, there was one object that betrayed the mask. A cracked St. Bridget medal, his mother's last possession. He never looked at it, but never let it go. The wind shifted, carrying a sound that didn't belong. A scrape, a faint shuffle, like fabric. Brushing metal. Ethan slowed, gaze narrowing on the playground equipment half buried in snow. A shape slumped against the slide, looked at first glance like a discarded bundle of rags. But then it moved. He approached, irritation prickling. Who would linger here, in this weather, at this hour? His polished shoes crunched against the frozen ground as he drew closer. His irritation evaporated. Two small forms were curled together in the drift. Children. Girls. Identical in every fragile line of their faces. Their skin was waxy blue, lips trembling even in unconsciousness. One had her arm curled protectively around the other, fingers interlaced like they'd sworn never to let go. The sight hit Ethan with a force he could not explain, as though some unseen hand had cracked open a wall he'd built years ago. Jesus Christ, he muttered, kneeling in the snow. His cashmere coat was off his shoulders before he thought about it, wrapping around the trembling bodies. They were frighteningly light, like fragile birds fallen from a nest. As he pulled them against his chest, he noticed details his brain filed away like evidence. A hospital band cut jaggedly from one child's wrist, a silver locket clenched in the other's fist, its hinge soldered shut. And etched on its surface, nearly buried by scratches, was a motto he hadn't seen since his university days, a phrase tied to a chapter of his life he'd thought long closed. His hands, which never shook in a boardroom, trembled as he dialed 911. Two children, Wellington Park playground, hypothermia, send an ambulance, now. The minutes stretched into an eternity as he crouched in the snow, holding the girls against his body heat. One of them stirred faintly, her lashes fluttering like wings against her frost-kissed cheek. Ethan bent low, his breath fogging in the air between them. "You're safe," he whispered, voice breaking before he could stop it. The words felt foreign in his mouth, yet once spoken they bound him as tightly as the girls clutched each other. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder, rushing toward them. Ethan Vale, who had built his fortune on ruthless detachment, found himself holding on to two fragile lives as though they were the only deal worth keeping. And in that frozen, suspended moment, he understood with bone-deep clarity, something had shifted. Nothing in his perfectly controlled world would ever be the same. Under the bright, sterile glow of the pediatric ICU, the world felt too sharp, too loud. The storm outside had faded to silence, but inside Massachusetts General Hospital, machines hummed, monitors beeped, and urgent footsteps tapped across polished floors. Ethan Vale stood rigid, his coat ruined and damp from snow, his hands still faintly trembling though he'd never admit it. A man used to mastering crises in boardrooms and financial markets now found himself utterly powerless, watching two unconscious children fight for warmth and breath. Doctors swarmed around the twin girls, Mira and Nia, their identical faces pale beneath oxygen masks. Nurses inserted IV lines with practiced speed. A voice, brisk and clinical, broke through the blur. Severe hypothermia, malnourishment, dehydration. They'll survive because of quick intervention. The relief Ethan should have felt didn't arrive. Instead, a strange weight pressed on his chest, unfamiliar and unwelcome, something dangerously close to fear. "Sir, are you a relative?" The question snapped him back. A doctor stood in front of him, clipboard in hand, suspicion in his eyes. Ethan shook his head. "No, I just found them." He realized too late how flat that sounded. Just found them, as if he'd stumbled over lost keys rather than two fragile lives. The doctor nodded curtly. "Child services will need to be notified." Ethan's gaze drifted back to the girls. Their small hands were still locked together, fingers curled like ivy clinging to stone. He noticed again what had struck him in the park, the silver locket clutched tight in Mira's fist. Even under hospital light, its hinge gleamed oddly. He reached out carefully when a nurse adjusted Mira's IV. For a moment, the locket slipped, just enough for Ethan to see the etched words, "Endure and rise." His stomach turned. That phrase, he'd last seen it carved into the wooden desk of a lecture hall during his early years at Boston University, a motto whispered among struggling students trying to make it through. His mother had repeated it too, when every bill seemed like a battle. Why would it appear here on these children? Then he saw it. The hinge wasn't broken, it had been deliberately soldered shut, a secret sealed away. And on Nia's wrist, the remnant of a hospital band crudely sliced off as though someone had ripped it away in haste. The printed text was incomplete, only a partial name visible. No. His mind stumbled over the possibilities. Noonan? Noble? Noor? The mystery gnawed at him. As he watched, Nia stirred faintly, eyelids flickering, lips dry and cracked. Her hand twitched, searching instinctively for her sisters, and then her eyes opened, hazy, confused. She whispered something so faint Ethan almost missed it. "We waited." The word pierced through him like an arrow. He crouched close, lowering his voice in a way he hadn't since childhood. "Waited for who?" he asked. Her gaze landed on him, soft but unwavering. "Mom said the right person would come." Then her eyes rolled shut, exhaustion pulling her under again. The sirens that had carried them here still rang faintly in Ethan's memory. He realized with a jolt that he hadn't released their hands since the park. He was still tethered to them, as though some invisible thread had bound him the moment he found them in the snow. A nurse gently ushered him back as the team continued working. Ethan leaned against the wall, fighting the urge to pace. For once, there was no negotiation to win, no figures to bend, no boardroom to conquer. Only two children, a sealed locket, and a hospital band torn short. Mysteries that felt far more dangerous than any hostile takeover. And in the center of it all, Ethan Vale whispered again, to no one and everyone, "You're safe." It came out like a vow he didn't yet understand, but one he already knew he could never break. The storm outside had quieted into a thin veil of snow, but Ethan Vale's penthouse was louder than it had ever been. The place had always been a monument to silence, glass walls overlooking the harbor, chrome fixtures, furniture so white it seemed allergic to imperfection. Tonight, though, the silence was broken. There were the soft padding of small feet on marble floors, the squeak of unfamiliar sneakers donated by the hospital, and the faint, cautious laughter of two children who had never known what it felt like to stand in a room that cost more than everything they had ever owned combined. Mira stood by the windows, her eyes darting not to the view but to the exits, as if plotting escape routes should she need them. She touched nothing, her thin frame rigid, protective. Nia, however, pressed her nose against the glass, fogging it with excitement, tracing clumsy shapes with her finger. "It's like being on top of the world," she whispered. Ethan watched the contrast between them and felt something heavy twist in his chest. These weren't just children, they were survivors, mirrors of each other, yet divided by how they faced a hostile world. The sound of the door unlocking shattered the fragile moment. Ethan stiffened even before the tall figure entered. Ava Sterling swept in like a storm of her own. At 41, she was elegance carved in. Sharp lines, her dark suit flawless, her expression carved from ice. Once his wife, now his fiercest critic, Ava had co-built the early foundation of his empire before walking away when his obsession with control consumed everything else. Her eyes landed on the twins instantly. She froze, disbelief flickering across her features. Then she turned on Ethan, voice cutting like glass. "Tell me this isn't what it looks like." Ethan straightened, but his words stumbled. "I found them. In the snow. They would have died." Ava's gaze softened just slightly as she took in the children's hollow cheeks, their mismatched clothes, the way Mira instinctively pulled Nia behind her. Then her voice hardened again. "And you brought them here? Ethan, you don't even keep food in your fridge. You don't know the first thing about children. I know enough not to leave them in the system that would separate them." His words came out sharper than he intended. Both twins flinched, and Ethan regretted it instantly. Ava crouched then, her heels clicking softly as she lowered herself to Mira's eye level. For the first time, the sharp edges of her melted. "You're safe," she said gently, her tone almost maternal. "No one is going to hurt you here." Mira studied her, unblinking, as though weighing every syllable for truth. Suspense hung thick in the room, and then Ethan noticed something strange. Mira's hand tightening around the locket again. Ava followed his gaze. "That's old," she murmured, eyes narrowing. "Antique silver. Where did you get that, sweetheart?" Mira didn't answer. Her silence was heavy, deliberate. Naya, however, chirped. "It was Mama's. She said it's for the person who can open it." Ethan and Ava exchanged a glance. The hinge was sealed like armor, and the words etched into it, "Endure and rise," seemed to glow in the light. Before Ethan could respond, the penthouse security system beeped. A notification flashed across the wall screen. "Balcony sensor breach, 02:47 a.m. Ethan's blood ran cold. They were 40 floors up. No one should be able to touch that balcony. Yet when he rushed to the glass wall, the evidence was there, undeniable. A handprint smeared into the frost. Large, adult, fresh. Mira inhaled sharply, pulling Nia tighter against her. "They found us," she whispered, voice trembling for the first time. Ethan turned slowly. "Who found you?" The twins said nothing, but the terror in their eyes was louder than any answer. Ava, pale but composed, straightened beside him. "You've dragged yourself into something far more dangerous than you realize." Ethan, who had built empires on ruthless certainty, suddenly felt the ground tilt beneath him. These weren't just abandoned children. They were carrying secrets someone wanted buried. Secrets sealed in a locket, whispered in half sentences, and traced in frost across his unbreakable glass walls. And for the first time in decades, Ethan realized the empire he'd built couldn't shield him from what was coming next. The city wore a mask of calm, but Ethan Vale had lived long enough to know masks always cracked. Days had passed since the night he found the twins, yet the unease clung to him like frost in his veins. His penthouse, once a citadel of control, felt less like a sanctuary now and more like a stage where unseen eyes were watching. Every time the wind rattled the balcony doors, he remembered the handprint in the snow. Someone had been there, someone who wanted him to know. Ava Sterling was the one who forced him to dig deeper. She'd arrived again, not as an ex-wife or a critic, but as a woman with instincts honed by years of business battles and her own, quieter philanthropy. She sat across from him in his glass office, a file spread between them. "They're not just lost kids, Ethan, look." Inside the folder were records retrieved from an abandoned shelter office, papers nearly ruined by water damage. At first glance, they looked ordinary: meal vouchers, attendance logs, volunteer notes. But between the lines, patterns emerged. The same name surfaced again and again: Layla Noor, a volunteer who had vanished from official systems 5 years ago. Ethan felt the air tighten in his chest as Ava slid a photo from the folder. A young woman stood outside a soup kitchen, dark hair whipping in the wind, eyes fierce with determination. And in the corner of the photograph, barely visible, a locket glinted at her throat, the same one now clenched in Mira's fist. "Who was she?" Ethan murmured, more to himself than to Ava. "Not just a volunteer," Ava replied. She tapped another document, a faded clinic form with a donor code scribbled across the top. "She was treated at a community medical program. Look at this code. That's one of mine." Ethan's eyes flicked up. "Yours?" Ava leaned back, her voice calm but heavy. "After the divorce, I funded several initiatives quietly. Anonymous. One of them was a biotech pilot program for cancer treatments. This donor code, it matches the program." The name Layla Noor hung in the air like smoke. Ethan sifted through more documents, a stack of origami cranes folded with painstaking precision, each one hiding a tiny note inside. One note read only, "E, keep them together." His stomach twisted. That initial, his initial, or was it coincidence? The twins hadn't spoken much, but when asked about their mother, their eyes darkened with a grief so raw it silenced even Ava. Mira had whispered once, "She's said to be brave, even when people want to make you disappear." Disappear, the word gnawed at Ethan's thoughts. Later, he drove with Ava to a church basement where boxes of abandoned belongings were kept. The air smelled of mildew and candle wax. An old priest handed them a shoebox marked with the initials LN. Inside were fragments of a life dismantled, A worn library card, a child's drawing of two girls holding hands, and a letter in an envelope brittle with age. Across the front, in delicate, urgent handwriting, "For the night you understand." Ethan's hand trembled as he held it. He wanted to tear it open, to end the suspense clawing at his ribs, but something in the careful script stopped him. He slipped the envelope into his coat instead, the paper pressing against his heart like a brand. When he returned home, Mira was awake, sketching the city skyline with a pencil stub she had found. Without looking up, she asked, "Did you find her?" Ethan froze. "Who?" "Our mom," she said simply. Her voice carried the weight of someone far older than 9. "We know you're looking." Before Ethan could respond, the security system beeped again. Another breach. This time not at the balcony, but at the lobby level. The guard's voice came through the intercom, tense. "Mr. Vale, someone tried to access the building with counterfeit credentials. They asked for the girls by name." Naya, who had been asleep on the couch, woke with a cry. Mira's face went pale, but her hands stayed steady as she reached for her sister. "They found us," she whispered again, her voice more certain this time. Ava crossed the room, her heels clicking like a countdown. "Ethan, whoever this is, they're not just following, they're hunting." For once, Ethan had no retort. He stood at the window, staring down at the city that had always bent to his will. Tonight, Boston felt different, darker, layered with secrets he couldn't untangle yet. His empire couldn't shield him here. The answers lay in a sealed locket, a torn hospit, all banned, and a letter waiting for the night he had the courage to understand. And in the reflection of the glass, he caught sight of Mira watching him. Her eyes weren't fearful anymore. They were calculating, almost daring, as if she knew the truth already and was waiting for him to catch up. The courthouse smelled faintly of paper and polish, of lives measured in affidavits and stamped decisions. Ethan Vale had been in courts before. Contract disputes, merger approvals, hostile takeovers. But this one felt alien. The stakes here weren't shares or billions. They were two small girls sitting outside the chamber with coloring books on their laps, waiting for strangers in robes to decide whether they could remain together or be torn apart by the machinery of the system. The air inside the family court chamber was taut as a drawn bow. Lawyers shuffled papers, social workers murmured quietly. Judge Harmon presided with the calm gravity of someone who had seen every permutation of heartbreak pass through her bench. Across the table, Mrs. Rodriguez, the social worker assigned to Mira and Nia, adjusted her glasses. "Mr. Vale," she began, "your temporary guardianship has gone smoothly, but long-term placement is another matter. These children require stability. I have concerns about your schedule, your reputation for excessive work hours, and..." Ethan cut in before he could stop himself. "I've changed my schedule." His voice rang louder than he intended. "I've delegated more in the past month than in the last 20 years. The courtroom stirred with whispers. Ethan, the infamous perfectionist, admitting to loosening his grip? Unthinkable. Ava Sterling sat at the back, arms crossed, every inch the strategist even outside the boardroom. When the judge gestured for testimony, Ava surprised everyone by standing. "Your Honor, I know this man. I built a company with him. I also divorced him for the very flaws you've just listed. But..." She paused, her voice softening. "I've also seen something change since he found those girls. He's reorganized Black Veil Industries, instituted family leave policies that cost shareholders millions. He's choosing them over the empire he once worshipped." Ethan's chest tightened. Ava's words were not flattery. They were flint striking stone, sparking truth. Then the twins were invited forward. Mira walked first, her posture stiff, chin lifted as though she had rehearsed for battle. Naya followed, smaller, her fingers brushing the locket that never left her neck. The judge leaned forward, her tone gentler. "Do you understand what adoption means?" Naya nodded, her voice clear despite her size. "It means Mr. Ethan will be our dad forever, and we'll stay together." The courtroom softened, some eyes wet with unspilled tears. Then Mira spoke, her words cutting deeper. "It means no one can separate us. Ever again." The judge's gaze slid back to Ethan. "Mr. Vale, your life is built on deals. Are you prepared for the one deal you cannot walk away from?" Ethan reached into his coat and pulled out the brittle envelope he had carried since the church basement. "There's something I need to show you, Your Honor." His fingers trembled as he placed it on the table. The room leaned closer as though the paper itself radiated heat. He tore it open. Inside was a single page, yellowed with time. The words were short, almost a whisper on the page. "Ethan, if you ever see this, it means you found them. Keep them together. They are yours as much as mine." The room erupted. Gasps rippled. The judges gave. "All wrapped for order." Ava's hand flew to her mouth. The twins froze, eyes wide as if waiting for him to confirm what they already suspected. Mrs. Rodriguez spoke first, her tone incredulous. "Mr. Vale, are you saying—" "I don't know yet," Ethan admitted, his voice raw. "But I'll find out. DNA, records, whatever it takes. What I do know is this. Whether by blood or by fate, I found them. And I will not lose them." At that moment, his phone buzzed on the table. Michael, his assistant, sent a single urgent text. "Emergency board session. Jenkins threatening mass defection. Stock collapsing. They demand you now." The choice rose before him like a guillotine. His empire on one side, fragile children on the other. Every instinct screamed for the familiar fight, the battlefield he knew. But then he looked at Mira's eyes, dark, guarded, waiting for betrayal, and at Naya, clutching the locket like a lifeline. He silenced the phone. "They can wait. My daughters cannot." The judge studied him with unreadable eyes. The chamber was silent except for the scratching of her pen. "This case is highly unusual," she said finally, "but sometimes law must bow to what is right. Pending DNA verification and a 6-month supervisory period, I am approving guardianship to Mr. Vale." The words landed like a verdict not just on his case, but on his soul. Ethan's empire might crumble, but as he knelt beside the twins, feeling their small hands slip into his, he knew he had chosen correctly. And yet, as they left the courthouse, a shadow lingered. Outside on the courthouse steps, a figure in a dark coat watched, his face hidden, his hands gloved. He lit a cigarette, the flame briefly illuminating a scar running down his cheek. When the twins passed, Mira stiffened. She recognized him. She said nothing. Not yet. But in her silence, the suspense deepened, because she knew the fight for family had only just begun. The March wind howled against the courthouse windows, rattling them like bones. Inside Judge Harmon's chamber, the air was still, almost reverent, as though every breath in the room had been suspended on a wire. Ethan Vale sat ramrod straight in his tailored suit, yet nothing about him looked composed. His knuckles were white against the table, his throat tight with a dread he hadn't felt since the day he watched his mother lowered into the ground. Outside, Mira and Nia waited in the hallway with Michael and Ava. They wore matching dresses chosen for the hearing, their hair neatly braided, but their eyes carried the weight of children who had learned too young that appearances never guaranteed safety. They whispered together, the locket dangling between them like a pendulum of fate. "Mr. Vale," Judge Harmon said, peering over her glasses, "this is extraordinary. You've known these girls for only 3 months. Adoption is permanent, irreversible. Are you certain?" Ethan's voice came low, steady, but beneath it a storm brewed. "Time isn't always the best measure of love, Your Honor. These girls don't need another temporary solution. They need someone who won't leave. Not this week, not next year. Never." The judge studied him, unimpressed by grand words. "You've been called ruthless, uncompromising. Your own marriage ended over your devotion to work. Why should I believe you've changed?" Ethan's hand drifted to the pocket where he kept Layla Noor's letter. He thought of the words written in her delicate script. "They are yours as much as mine." The truth throbbed beneath his ribs like a heartbeat. "Because for the first time in my life," he said quietly, "I've found something I cannot afford to lose." The judge raised a brow. "And what happens, Weded? And the truth comes out when the bloodlines are revealed?" Ethan's chest tightened. The moment had come. He signaled to Michael, who stepped forward carrying a slim evidence folder. Inside were the DNA results Ava had pushed him to secure. Ethan hadn't shown them to anyone yet, not even to himself. His hand trembled as he opened it, eyes skimming the lines. The words hit him like a blow, 99.8% probability of paternity. A gasp rippled through the room. Ava's lips parted in shock. Judge Harmon froze mid-note. Ethan's world tilted, the neat compartments of his life shattering. "They're mine," he whispered, voice breaking. "By blood, by fate, by everything that matters." At that moment, the chamber door creaked open. Mira and Naya slipped inside, hand in hand, their eyes wide. Nia clutched the locket, her small fingers prying at the hinge that had resisted everyone else. Suddenly, with a metallic snap, it gave way. The lid sprang open. Inside was a faded photograph. Layla Noor, younger, smiling, her arm looped around Ethan's shoulder at a university event he barely remembered. The second compartment held a folded scrap of paper. Mira pulled it out and read aloud, her voice trembling but clear. "If you are reading this, it means I couldn't stay. Ethan, they are yours. Protect them, keep them together, and never let them forget they were loved." The silence after was crushing. The girls turned toward Ethan, Their eyes mirrored Layla's in ways he had never let himself imagine. Judge Harmon leaned back, her gavel forgotten. "Mr. Vale, this changes everything. Are you prepared to shoulder this not as a guardian, but as a father?" Before Ethan could answer, the chamber doors banged open. Security rushed forward, but not before a tall man in a black coat stepped inside. The scar down his cheek caught the light. His eyes locked on the twins, hunger and malice burning there. "You can't keep them," he snarled. His voice was gravel, bitter. "They belong to me." The room erupted. The judge shouted for order. Officers restrained him, but not before his words lanced through the air. Mira's face drained of color. She knew him. Nia pressed herself against Ethan's side, shaking violently. "Who is he?" Ethan demanded, his voice like steel. Mira swallowed hard, her eyes glistening. "He was with Mom when she got sick. He said he'd take us if she died, but she told us to run. She told us to find you." The scarred man spat curses as he was dragged away, but the damage was done. The danger that had chased them through snowstorms and shelters now stood revealed. And for Ethan, there was no more room for doubt, no more luxury of distance. These weren't just two children he had rescued. They were his daughters, and enemies from the shadows were already moving against them. He gathered Mira and Nia close, his voice a vow that filled the chamber. "You're safe. No one is taking you away from me. Not now. Not ever." For the first time, Mira's guard cracked. She clutched his lapel, whispering a single word that shattered every wall inside him. "Dad." The judge's gavel finally fell, but her words were drowned out by the roaring certainty in Ethan's chest. His empire might crumble, his reputation might fracture, but none of it mattered anymore. Because in that moment, under the gaze of strangers and shadows alike, Ethan Vale understood the true measure of wealth. Not in power, not in billions, but in the fragile, fierce love of two children who had found him in the snow and changed everything.